You're listening to
Catholic Sprouts,
the daily podcast for Catholic kids that strives to plant seeds of faith.
How you doing, Sprouts? Today is September 3rd, 2019, the memorial of St. Gregory the Great, who was a pope and doctor of the Church. Obedience comes from two Latin words, ob, which means in the direction of something, and audire, to hear. So, someone who is obedient does what they are told to do. They go in the direction of what they hear. For children, especially boys, obedience is the foundational virtue. It is the virtue that forms the base for everything else that they're going to do in their lives. So, if you didn't listen to your mom and dad, right, you wouldn't know a ton of things. You wouldn't know how to eat properly, how to wash yourself, how to say please and thank you, how to survive. You wouldn't know not to touch a hot stove or stick forks in electrical outlets. So, obedience isn't just a nice idea. It's super important. It's necessary if we want to just survive. But just as obedience applies to natural things, like brushing your teeth or getting up in the morning, going to school, not putting your hand on a super hot stove and burning it off, it also applies to supernatural things. So like praying, attending Mass, going to confession, receiving grace. Our obedience to our parents, our natural parents, right, those who watch over us in this natural world, will help us be obedient to God, right, who is supernatural, right? So being obedient in time, in this place, in this world, in the temporal things, will help us to be obedient to eternal things. That is God, right? And Pope St. Gregory the Great is a perfect example of this. He was born around the year 540. That's about 1,500 years ago, for those of you that don't like to do math, in Rome, the great and beautiful city in Italy. Gregory's parents gave him a Greek name, Gregorios, which means watchful, vigilant. And funny enough, people who wrote about Gregory's life said that he was really diligent in keeping God's commands. That means he was really good about keeping God's commands. He really sought to do that. He sought to be obedient. He tried to be obedient. So even though he may not have understood all the reasons why he had to do things, Gregory kept God's commands. Years later, after his parents died, Gregory, who had not become pope yet, right, turned his family home into a monastery. This guy's really hardcore. There he spent years praying and enjoying the silence and peace of the monastery. He really loved it. He loved the quiet. It was nice and easy. It was really chill. And then around the year 590, so he was probably around his 40s, he was chosen as the next pope. So he went from a super peaceful, quiet life to something that was really busy, really kind of stressful. He was important. He was the leader. And he was not at all happy about this. He didn't want the busy life of the Pope in charge of leading the whole church and doing a bunch of stuff. And yet, Gregory still obeyed God's will. So, did you catch that? Gregory obeyed God's will. And eventually, he went on to be a phenomenal pope. Not just like a good pope, a nice pope. No, like a great pope. That's why a part of his name now, he is named Great later on, right? Like a lot of people will say that Pope John Paul II, me including, will say that he is Pope John Paul the Great. So Gregory became this great pope, and more importantly, he became a saint, right? He cared for the poor, he helped convert the British Isles from paganism, and he encouraged a special form of music at Mass, which you might have heard of, called Gregorian chant. So by obeying God, he was transformed. In his obedience, by being obedient, he was made better, stronger. Think about this another way. In the book of Exodus, God gives a set of commandments to Moses, right? Among those, he commands, honor your father and your mother, that your days may be long in the land which the Lord your God gives you. God didn't just randomly say, honor your father and your mother because I said so. No. He followed this up when he was talking to Moses. He followed it up with a line of reasoning. There's a reason why you should honor your father and your mother, so that your days may be long in the land which the Lord your God gives you. So in this commandment, God is very clearly telling us that obedience to our parents gives us life. So think of it like this. If you never listened to your parents and you're a crazy child and you wanted to jump out of a third-story window, that would probably kill you or hurt you a lot, right? And it might shorten your life, okay? But if you listen to your parents, if you follow their wisdom, if you are obedient to what they say, it very clearly, it will mirror what is written in the commandment in Exodus to Moses, that you will have life. And the same thing goes spiritually. So when we're tired, maybe, or we don't want to pray, we don't want to go to Mass on Sunday, maybe, or we don't want to pray before we go to bed at night or pray before a meal. But our parents say, hey, we need to do this. Hey, you need to maybe pray a rosary as a family, maybe pray some Hail Marys together, or sit down and do some sort of family blessing, whatever it is. The same thing goes for that sort of obedience. By following our parents spiritually, by obeying them spiritually, we will receive life. We will receive grace from God. And the cool thing is, this isn't just in the Old Testament, right? St. Paul, the apostle, reiterates this in his letter to the Ephesians. There he says, children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Now, even though it's the right thing to do, even though it's going to give us life, even though it's going to help us get to heaven, obedience isn't always easy. Even for adults, it's sometimes super hard. There's going to be times where we'll be tempted to whine, or to tell our parents no, or complain. And that kind of stuff just makes everything harder. Remember, obedience is a virtue. It's a good habit. So the more you do it, the easier it will get. And when you combine it with grace, when you combine it with prayer, it might not only get easier, it'll actually be kind of fun. It'll actually make you joyful. So the challenge for today is, next time your mom, your dad, your grandma, your grandpa, someone over you tells you to do something, say, yes, mom, yes, Dad, and go do it directly. Trying to find some action today. Maybe they say, hey, go upstairs and brush your teeth, get ready for bed. Say, yes, Mom, and then just go do it. Don't ask why. Don't hesitate. Don't reason about some crazy thing or make up a story or ask for a cup of milk. Just go make it happen.
That's it for Catholic Sprouts today. We'll be back tomorrow, but until then, continue to grow in your faith and truly sprout into the beautiful creation that God intended you to be. One final word to the grown-ups. Thank you so much for listening to the Catholic Sprouts podcast. I would like to invite you to join a special Facebook group just for those that listen to the Catholic Sprouts podcast. We will use this group to connect, to share resources around that week's theme, and simply celebrate raising future saints. To find the direct link to the Facebook group, simply check the notes for this podcast episode.